Election campaigning is in full swing in neighbouring Zimbabwe as the country gears to head to the polls come the 23rd of August. Now, the elections come against a backdrop of one of the world's highest rates of inflation and accusations of intensifying crackdown on the opposition. African politics professor at the University of South Africa, that is shortened UNISA, Everisto Benyera, now joins us virtually from South Africa to discuss Zimbabwe's 2023 presidential general elections. Good morning, Professor. Thank you so much for making time to speak to us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yes. Professor, what is your take on the manner in which the Electoral Commission of Zimbabwe has handled everything thus far in preparation of the upcoming elections?
Elections are a very tedious process, and the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has run the process, one would say, smoothly. But again, the feeling that is there generally in Zimbabwe is that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has a posture of impartiality, but there is a heavy burden on its shoulders. You can sort of get this from the fact that even as we are having this discussion right now, there's no political party that has had access to the voters' roll. Why am I singling out the voters' roll? The voters' roll is very important in any electoral process because it is the beginning of the legitimating of the process of electoral democracy. There are basically three phases to the elections: the pre-electoral phase, the electoral phase, and the post-electoral phase. So in all earnest, Zimbabwe has entered into the electoral phase. And a key component of the electoral phase is the availability of the correct voters' roll and on time. Without the voters' roll being available, voters cannot verify their names. And this is when you will see people complaining that the election was not free and fair because they were not given enough time to access the voters' roll. And the absence of the voters' roll is even more important for political parties because it will inform their strategies going into the electoral phase. So, in a nutshell, the voters' roll is not available. And why is it not available on time? There are many factors, but one of the key factors is that over time, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has turned more into a political actor than an independent electoral commission. This is problematic. And again, it is one problem that comes when one of the contestants is also responsible for preparing the playing field.
Now, we understand that there has been a cost charged for candidates to contest in the upcoming elections. What are your thoughts on this?
It is very interesting that in Africa generally, there is no qualification that is placed on a massively important job, such as that of running a country, that you just have to be popular. So we see that the first problem is that popularity and not morality. It's popularity, not intellect, and not ethics. And coming close to your question, in a capitalistic world, democracy is then reduced to the size of one's pocket. Who can finance a huge campaign rally? Who has the money to campaign nationwide and to field candidates across the country? Elections cost money, and sometimes one is tempted, given the enormous amounts of monies that are involved in running national elections. At times when I travel through Africa, I go to you pass through Malawi, you go to Guinea-Bissau, you go to some of the most impoverished countries in Africa. You ask yourself, is it not better for these countries to suspend elections and use the money that they have to improve the livelihoods of the people? Is that not a better delivery of human rights than giving them a civic right to vote in what others have termed choiceless elections that produce a non-outcome? look at Denis Sassou Nguesso, look at the Ayademas in Togo. That family has been in power for the past 45 years. So why waste money in voting? Now, the unintended consequences is that political parties and candidates may resort to foreign funding if they fail to raise money locally. And this again taints the credibility of elections. Now, coming to your question and directly to Zimbabwe now, the charges are obviously exorbitant and they do not reflect the current economic crisis that is there in Zimbabwe. There is no sink, and you see that this figure of 20,000 US dollars is so high that other candidates like Robert Chapman, Linda Masarira, and Valerio, I've forgotten the surname, have already failed to raise that money. It means they are out of the presidential race, not because they don't have supporters, not because their manifestos are bad, not because they are bad people, but because they are poor, because they don't have the money. Then you get a feeling that certain figures are put there to exclude others and to include others. In a nutshell, it is not fair, and actually it is not democratic to put such a huge price on democracy.
Having said that, Professor, would you then say that do we expect these elections to be conducted in a free and fair manner?
The short answer is no. Zimbabwe is operating like a country that is under some state of emergency, if I may characterize it that way, both politically and economically. Because as we are speaking right now, let me give you one example of a sitting member of parliament, Mr. Job Sikala. He has been in detention without trial for a very long time now. And what ordinary citizens then ask is that if this can happen to a member of parliament, what about me as a Tuafena Aufiko? What will happen to me? Honestly, this is not democratic. And others would even go and say it is unconstitutional to hold somebody for such a long period of time without trial. And if this can happen to those that make the laws, what about to those that are made to be ruled? So the short answer is that no, the political environment is not conducive to the dispensation of democratic, free and fair elections. And this also has to be analyzed with the background of economy that is struggling, an economy that is living on remittances.
Now, when we look at, the controversial patriotic bill that was recently passed by Parliament, this is raising concerns about its impact on democratic freedoms and also just international relations. What is your take on this bill, and how exactly will it affect freedom of speech ahead of these elections?
The short answer, again, in the interest of time, is that there are some values that can never be legislated. Patriotism is supposed to be intrinsic and not extrinsic. And the moment that a state begins to legislate things such as patriotism, it actually indicates the absence of something. So time will tell as to why this bill was enacted. But in my view, Zimbabweans are among some of the most patriotic people. And in fact, most Africans are very patriotic. This is why you see, even in Namibia, there are Zimbabweans that are there. They will never abandon their nation. They will tell you that I am a Zimbabwean. One day things will be okay. I will go wrong. I don't think the legislation of patriotism is something that was necessary at this stage. Maybe it occurs in some other democracies like the United States in a different form for a different reason, but our democracy has not yet reached at that point that we need to legislate for patriotism. In my view, only time can tell as to why this development was there.
Professor, now let's take a look at the list of candidates that are currently running for office. What do you make of them?
I will rephrase your question. What is the best vehicle for managing the post-colony in Africa? Is it the former liberation movement like in Namibia, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, and so on? Or is it the family? We have tried the two Kabilas in the DRC and the Ayademas have been ruling Togo? Is it the monarchy as in Morocco and in Eswatini? Or is it the clan as in Somalia where there is clan-based politics? Or stated differently, what is politics really in Africa? What is politics in Zimbabwe? Politics is now a career and not a service to the nation. And when that happens, democracy is then reduced to a game of numbers, not reason, not merit, not ethics. And the best candidates are not those that put the nation first, but the best candidate becomes the one who gave the most t-shirts, the one who gave the most donations, the one who promised the most. Democracy is now problematic. In fact, democracy has been problematic for a very long time because now more than ever, meritocracy and competence have been relegated. Political parties in Africa produce huge volumes of their electoral manifestos. Those electoral manifestos are not meant for the ordinary citizens in Okakarara or in Omngwelume or in Omthia, but they are meant for a certain audience somewhere there. There is a different line of communication that political parties in Africa use to get votes. And in most cases, that is a violence of different forms. It could be the withdrawal of services in some cases, or it could be physical violence in some other cases. So in Zimbabwe, the pool of candidates that are there right now, my view is that not one of them is suited alone to carry the task that is at hand. More so, given the nature in which they are so polarized and they are so divided. No one is talking about working with the other for the good of the nation. Everybody is about positioning themselves as better than A and B and C. Patronage politics and not craft competency, not craft literacy is what is used in Africa to appoint ministers. A minister is appointed as the Minister of Education, not because they've got the brightest ideas about how to run education in Zimbabwe, but because they are the highest on the party list. Its seniority, its patronage. Again, I go back to the issue of allegiance. Take, for example, in Zimbabwe, where the minister called Tendai Biti, some viewed him as one of the best ministers of finance in Africa, but he is not the minister of finance today, not because of his competence or lack thereof, but because of political differences. So as long as Africa does not put competence first, but allegiance and party list, we will continue to have candidates whose allegiance are towards the political party and not the nation. And then we wander into this realm of the multiple centers of power. Are you accountable to ZANU-PF, to the people, to the state, to your clan, and so on and so on? This is very complex.
Professor, let me just come in there for a while. Taking into consideration that your answer to my question regarding whether we foresee these elections to be free and fair, you answered that shortly and clearly saying no. Now, also having heard what you just explained, are we then saying that we do not expect, or are you saying that you do not expect an issue of achieving unity, national unity within Zimbabwe, or even having these possible candidates, should they be in power, be able to deal with some of the challenges that the country is facing right now, such as high inflation? Does that mean to you that it seems very impossible at the moment?
A government of national unity is most unlikely in Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF cannot afford to have the national cake shared again. They learned something and forgot nothing about 2009 to 2013 when Zimbabwe had a government of national unity between Robert Mugabe and Morgan Tsvangirai. So for me, a government of national unity is out of the question. However, a considerable judgment of what would surely require us to see the outcome is August 23. But again, I am not convinced that having learned so much, ZANU-PF will agree to another government of national unity in the near future.
As we wrap up our conversation, Professor, what then would you say are some of the key areas that the victorious candidate should focus on?
History has taught us that a day after elections, it will be business as usual. It's like what happens with Mandela Day here in South Africa. Elections are procedural in Zimbabwe. They are acted out in order to appease the proverbial international community. So others have even termed them regular and choiceless elections that fake democracy. In Zimbabwe, there is no link between elections and governance or elections and service delivery. Elections are a mere ritual that must be partaken so that we tick the boxes. A day after elections, the manifesto is put on the side and business continues as usual.
Professor, we appreciate you for making time to speak to us.
Thank you very much for having me.